The cramped Chicago apartment felt even smaller with the ancient leather suitcase sitting in the middle of Sarah's living room. 8 months pregnant and barely scraping by as a night shift nurse, she'd almost thrown the thing away when it arrived with her grandmother's will. The old woman had been a mystery, a Holocaust survivor who never spoke of her past and had cut all family ties decades ago. Sarah's hands trembled as she clicked open the brass latches. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, lay paintings she recognized from her art history textbooks. A Monet, 2 Picassos, a Van Gogh that was supposed to be lost forever. The authentication papers underneath bore Nazi stamps and her grandmother's maiden name, a name Sarah had never heard before. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We know what you found. You have 48 hours." Sarah's baby kicked hard against her ribs as she realized the terrible truth. Her grandmother hadn't just survived the Holocaust. She'd stolen from it, and now someone wanted those paintings back, no matter who got hurt. But what if the real secret wasn't what her grandmother had taken, but what she'd been protecting all these years? Sarah stared at the phone screen until the message disappeared, her heart hammering against her chest. The apartment's radiator clanked to life, making her jump. Everything felt different now. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, the silence more threatening. She forced herself to breathe slowly, the way they'd taught her in the prenatal classes she could barely afford. The baby responded to stress. She couldn't panic now. Her hands found her swollen belly, rubbing gentle circles as she tried to process what lay before her. The paintings were beautiful, even to her untrained eye. The Monet depicted water lilies in soft blues and greens, the brushstrokes visible even under the protective glass. One of the Picassos showed a woman's fractured face, all angles and sorrow. But it was the Van Gogh that made her breath catch, a self-portrait she'd seen in textbooks, one that museums had mourned as lost forever. Lost or stolen. Sarah picked up the authentication papers with shaking fingers. The Nazi eagle stamp seemed to burn against her skin. Underneath it, written in faded ink, ownership transferred to Reich Ministry, property of Elsa Hoffman, acquired 1943. Elsa Hoffman. Not Elena Kowalski, the name Sarah had always known her grandmother by, the name on the lease, on the rare birthday cards, on the death certificate that had arrived 3 weeks ago with a lawyer's note about the inheritance. Who was Elsa Hoffman? Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was her co-worker Jessica. "Hey girl, you picking up that double shift tomorrow?" Rodriguez called in sick. Normal life, intruding on the impossible. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity. Yesterday her biggest worry had been whether she could afford to take maternity leave. Now she was sitting on what had to be millions of dollars in stolen Nazi art, while someone, who, gave her ultimatums via text message. She needed to think. Sarah closed the suitcase carefully, her movements deliberate despite her racing pulse. The brass latches clicked shut with finality. She dragged it behind her couch, out of sight, though she knew that was pointless. If someone knew she had it, hiding it in her tiny apartment wouldn't help. The lawyer who'd handled the inheritance had seemed normal enough, a tired-looking man in a wrinkled suit who'd handed her the suitcase and asked her to sign some papers. Harold Brennan. She still had his card somewhere in the kitchen drawer, full of medical bills and overdue notices. Sarah heaved herself up from the floor, one hand on her lower back. At 8 months, everything was an effort. The baby had dropped lower this week, preparing for birth, and her pelvis ached constantly. She found Brennan's card wedged between a utility bill and a coupon for diapers she couldn't afford. Should she call him? But what would she say? "Hi, remember that suitcase you gave me? It's full of Nazi-stolen masterpieces, and someone's threatening me about it." The rational part of her mind, the part that had gotten her through nursing school while working 3 jobs, said she should call the police. Report the paintings, turn them over to whatever international agency handled these things, walk away clean. But the other part, the part that had grown up poor and was about to be a single mother with no savings, whispered different words. $200 million, maybe more, enough to give her baby everything she'd never had. security, education, a future that didn't involve choosing between rent and groceries. Her phone buzzed a third time. Sarah's blood froze as she read the message. "Beautiful view you have from your kitchen window. The blue curtains are lovely. Don't make us wait." They were watching her, right now. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly as she stepped away from the window, her grandmother's secrets feeling heavier than the child she carried. 48 hours had just become a countdown to something she couldn't yet imagine. The burgundy velvet lining felt like dried blood beneath Sarah's trembling fingers as she lifted the first painting from its protective cloth wrapping. Even in the dim basement light, the brushstrokes seemed to pulse with life, bold yellows and deep blues swirling together in a way that made her breath catch. She didn't know art, but she knew beauty, and this was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. A small white card was tucked beneath the frame's corner. Her hands shook as she read the typewritten text, "Van Gogh, Wheat Field with Cypresses, 1889. Stolen from Rothschild Collection, Paris, 1943. The basement suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Sarah sank onto an old paint can, her free hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. The baby kicked, hard, as if sensing her distress. "This can't be real," she whispered to the shadows. But the evidence was undeniable. She unwrapped the second painting with mechanical precision, a Monet water lily scene that seemed to shimmer even in the poor light. The card beneath read, "Stolen from private residence, Amsterdam, 1942. Family unknown." Family unknown. The words echoed in Sarah's mind as she thought of the yellowed photographs upstairs, grandmother Helen's careful smile hiding decades of secrets. How many families had lost these treasures? How many had died not knowing what happened to their precious heirlooms? The third painting made her gasp aloud. A Picasso sketch, all angular faces and geometric precision. The card's cold facts hit like physical blows, confiscated from Jewish gallery owner Berlin, 1941. Owner deported. Sarah's phone buzzed, startling her so badly she nearly dropped the Picasso. A text from Marcus. "How's the cleaning going? Need me to pick up dinner?" She stared at the screen, then at the paintings surrounding her. How could she possibly explain this to him? Marcus, who worried when she stayed up too late reading, who'd already installed 3 different baby monitors in preparation for their daughter's arrival. Marcus, whose grandfather had fought in World War II and still kept his Purple Heart on the mantel. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her mother. "Haven't heard from you today. Everything okay with the baby?" The irony wasn't lost on her. Her mother, who'd cut ties with Helen 20 years ago over some family dispute that was never fully explained. "She's not who you think she is, Sarah," her mother had said whenever Helen's name came up. "Some people reinvent themselves so thoroughly they forget what they really were." Now Sarah understood what her mother might have meant. She forced herself to check the remaining paintings, each discovery adding another layer of horror. A small Degas ballerina, a Cézanne's still life, 2 more Van Goghs, each accompanied by its damning documentation, each representing a life destroyed, a family torn apart. At the bottom of the suitcase, beneath the final painting, she found a leather journal, her grandmother's handwriting, filled page after page. Not the shaky script Sarah remembered from birthday cards, but bold, confident strokes. The entries were in German, a language Sarah had never known her grandmother spoke. She photographed several pages with her phone and ran them through a translation app, her heart pounding as the words appeared. "Heinrich says the collection must be moved again. The Americans are getting closer. My new identity papers are ready. Helen Morrison, refugee from London. No one will question an English war bride in America. The paintings will sleep until it's safe." Sarah's hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the phone. Heinrich. Her grandfather had been named Henry Morrison, the gentle man who taught her to fish and told her stories about fighting fascism in Europe. Had that been a lie too? Had he been Heinrich, a Nazi fleeing justice? The basement door creaked open upstairs. "Sarah, I saw your car outside." "Marcus." She shoved the journal into the suitcase, hastily wrapped the Picasso, and slammed the lid shut. The lock clicked with finality that felt like sealing a tomb. "Down here," she called, hoping her voice sounded normal. His footsteps thundered down the wooden stairs, and then he was there, tall, solid Marcus with his concerned brown eyes and the takeout bag in his hands. "You look pale. Have you been eating?" He set down the food and reached for her, helping her stand. "The baby." "We're fine." The lie came easily, automatically. "Just tired. There's more stuff down here than I expected." He glanced around the basement, his gaze passing right over the suitcase that now held the power to destroy everything they'd built together. "Well, you don't have to do it all today. Come on, let's get you upstairs. I brought that Thai food you've been craving." As Marcus led her toward the stairs, one hand protectively on her back, Sarah took one last look at the suitcase. In 8 weeks, she'd be responsible for another human being, a tiny girl who deserved to grow up safe, loved, and free from the sins of previous generations. But some sins, Sarah was beginning to understand, had very long shadows. The rain hammered against the apartment windows as Sarah sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by the scattered contents of her grandmother's suitcase. Each document she'd examined over the past 3 hours painted a darker picture of Eleanor Hoffman's hidden life. Her fingers trembled as she held a yellowed photograph of her grandmother as a young woman standing beside a tall man in an SS uniform. The man's arm wrapped possessively around Eleanor's waist, both of them smiling at the camera. Sarah's stomach lurched, not from the pregnancy but from the implications staring back at her. "Who were you, Grandma?" she whispered to the empty room. The baby kicked sharply, as if responding to her distress. Sarah placed a protective hand over her belly, feeling suddenly exposed despite being alone in her locked apartment. She'd been so careful to keep the blinds drawn since discovering the paintings, an instinctive paranoia that seemed justified now. A leather-bound journal lay open beside her, its pages filled with Eleanor's precise handwriting in both English and German. Most entries were mundane, shopping lists, appointments, observations about the weather, but scattered throughout were cryptic references that made Sarah's pulse quicken. "Package secured, contact in Zurich, confirms authenticity, must maintain cover." The entries began in 1944 and continued sporadically for decades, the final one dated just 2 months before Eleanor's death. Sarah flipped to that last entry, squinting at the faded ink. "Sarah's baby due soon. If something happens to me, she'll inherit everything. God help her. Some secrets die harder than the people who keep them." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Had Eleanor known she was in danger? Sarah thought back to their last conversation, searching for signs she might have missed. Her grandmother had seemed agitated, kept glancing toward the windows, insisted on walking Sarah to her car. At the time, Sarah had attributed it to Eleanor's increasing paranoia in old age. Now she wondered if it had been justified caution. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden in the silence. Sarah's heart hammered as she quickly gathered the documents, shoving them back into the suitcase. The bell rang again, followed by insistent knocking. "Sarah? It's Detective Morrison. We spoke yesterday." Sarah remembered him, the kind-faced man who'd questioned her about Eleanor's death. She'd assumed it was routine, but now every interaction took on new significance. She approached the door cautiously, keeping the chain latched. "What can I do for you, Detective?" Through the gap, she could see Morrison's weathered face, rain dripping from his coat. Behind him stood another man she didn't recognize, younger, with sharp features and cold eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they saw. "We'd like to ask you a few more questions about your grandmother. May we come in?" "I already told you everything I know." Sarah's voice sounded steadier than she felt. "This is Agent Kruger from the FBI," Morrison said, gesturing to his companion. "Some new information has come to light regarding Eleanor's past." The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Sarah winced. Agent Kruger stepped closer to the door, his pale eyes studying her intently. "Mrs. Chen, We have reason to believe your grandmother may have been involved in art trafficking, stolen pieces from World War II. Have you found anything unusual among her belongings?" Sarah's mouth went dry. The suitcase sat 20 feet behind her, filled with evidence that could either vindicate or condemn Eleanor, and now herself. Art trafficking? That's ridiculous. She was just an old woman. "Old women can have complicated pasts," Kruger said smoothly. "We're prepared to offer immunity in exchange for cooperation, but that offer won't remain open indefinitely." The implicit threat hung heavy between them. Sarah's mind raced. If she turned over the paintings now, what would happen to them? Would they be returned to their rightful owners or disappear into some government warehouse? And what about Eleanor's reputation, the only family legacy Sarah had left to pass on to her child? "I need to think about this," she said finally. Morrison's expression softened. "Sarah, if your grandmother was involved in something dangerous, those same people might come looking for whatever she left behind. You need to consider your safety and your baby's." After they left, Sarah double-locked the door and leaned against it, her breath coming in short gasps. She looked at the suitcase, then at her reflection in the dark window, a pregnant woman alone with a secret that could destroy her life or save it. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to us. We'll be in touch." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Someone had been watching, waiting. Eleanor's death suddenly seemed far less natural than she'd believed. The baby kicked again, and Sarah realized with crystal clarity that her choice was no longer just about money or morality. It was about survival. The morning light streaming through the kitchen window felt harsh against Sarah's tired eyes. She'd barely slept, her mind churning between the impossible images hidden in her grandmother's suitcase and the steady kicks from her baby, as if even he sensed something was wrong. Michael had left for his early shift at the hospital, pressing a concerned kiss to her forehead and making her promise to call if she needed anything. Now, sitting alone with her coffee growing cold, Sarah stared at her laptop screen. The cursor blinked accusingly in the search bar where she'd typed and deleted a dozen different queries. How did one even begin researching stolen Nazi art? The very phrase felt surreal, like something from a documentary, not her quiet suburban life. Finally she typed, "Nazi art theft, World War II restitution." The results flooded her screen. Thousands of articles, museum databases, legal proceedings spanning decades. Her stomach churned as she clicked through page after page of stolen paintings, sculptures, and artifacts. Families who'd spent their entire lives searching for pieces of their heritage, their history, torn away in the chaos of war. One article made her pause. A photograph showed an elderly woman weeping as she stood before a painting in a German museum, a Monet water lily that had belonged to her father. The caption explained it had taken 60 years to prove ownership and secure its return, 60 years of searching, of legal battles, of never giving up hope. Sarah's hand drifted to her belly. Would her own child inherit this burden? The thought made her nauseous. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Haven't heard from you since the funeral. Are you handling the estate matters okay? Let me know if you need help." Sarah stared at the message, her finger hovering over the keyboard. How could she possibly explain this to her mother? The woman who still couldn't understand why Sarah had insisted on attending grandmother Ruth's funeral in the first place, who'd spent years warning her that Ruth was difficult and lived in the past. Instead of responding, Sarah returned to her research. She found a website for art restitution claims, complete with forms and procedures for reporting potentially stolen pieces. The process looked overwhelming: documentation requirements, provenance research, legal affidavits. But there was also a phone number for preliminary consultations. Before she could lose her nerve, she dialed. "Holocaust Art Recovery Initiative, this is Jennifer speaking." Sarah's voice caught. "I think I may have some stolen artwork." The woman's tone immediately sharpened with professional interest. "Can you tell me more about the circumstances?" Sarah found herself explaining about her grandmother's death, the inherited suitcase, the paintings hidden inside. She was careful not to mention specific details. Something held her back from full disclosure. "Your grandmother may have been a guardian rather than a thief," Jennifer said gently. "Many Holocaust survivors and their families safeguarded artwork with the intention of eventual return, but circumstances often made that impossible. Has your family discussed this history?" "We don't really talk about that time," Sarah admitted. "My grandmother never spoke about the war years. That's unfortunately common. The trauma runs very deep. I'd recommend you document everything carefully, photograph the pieces, any papers or letters that might provide context, and please, don't attempt to handle this alone. There are legal implications, but also safety concerns. Some of these cases involve very valuable pieces, and not everyone involved in the art world operates ethically." Safety concerns. The phrase echoed in Sarah's mind long after she hung up. She'd been so focused on the legal and moral implications that she hadn't fully considered the danger. $200 million could make people do terrible things. The baby kicked hard, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her gasp. "I know, little one," she whispered. "Mama's scared too." By afternoon, she'd made a decision. She needed to see the paintings again, to really look at them, to photograph them as Jennifer had suggested. But first, she needed to understand more about Ruth herself. Sarah drove to her grandmother's house, now empty and staged for sale. Her mother had insisted on hiring professionals to clear it out, dismissing Sarah's offer to help as impractical given her condition. But Sarah still had the key. The house felt hollow, stripped of the heavy furniture and cluttered knickknacks it had made it feel so oppressive during visits. Now she could see the bones of it, the crown molding, the hardwood floors, the built-in bookshelves. It had been beautiful once. In what had been Ruth's bedroom, Sarah noticed something the estate sale team had missed. Behind the radiator, a small wooden box had fallen and lodged in the narrow space. Sarah managed to retrieve it, her pregnant belly making the task awkward. Inside the box were letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, European, and the postmarks were from Switzerland dated 1947. All were addressed to Ruth, but the return address was smudged beyond recognition. Sarah opened the first letter, squinting at the flowing script, and her blood ran cold as she deciphered the opening line. "My dearest Ruth, the paintings are safe, but we are not alone in searching for them." The coffee shop on 5th Street buzzed with the usual morning crowd, but Sarah felt exposed despite the anonymity of strangers. She'd chosen a corner table with clear sight lines to both entrances, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid just days ago. Now it felt like survival. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived precisely at 9, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon that spoke of European sophistication. Sarah recognized her immediately from the university website, the kind of woman who commanded respect simply by walking into a room. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades handling priceless artifacts. "Miss Chen?" Dr. Vasquez's accent carried traces of her Spanish childhood. "Thank you for meeting me." Sarah struggled to stand, her pregnancy making the movement awkward. "Thank you for coming. I know this must sound crazy. In my line of work, crazy is relative." Dr. Vasquez settled into her chair, studying Sarah with keen dark eyes. "You mentioned Nazi-looted art. That's not a claim I take lightly." Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling to the photos she'd taken. "I found these in my grandmother's belongings. I think they might be stolen, but I need to know for certain." The art historian's expression remained neutral as she examined the first image, the Van Gogh sketch. But Sarah caught the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her fingers stilled on the phone's screen. "May I?" Dr. Vasquez gestured for the phone, then swiped through the remaining photos with methodical precision. Her breathing grew shallow as she studied each piece. "Where exactly did you find these?" Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "In a suitcase. My grandmother passed away recently, and I'm settling her estate." Sarah kept the explanation vague, uncertain how much to reveal. Dr. Vasquez looked up sharply. "Your grandmother, what was her name?" "Rose Chen." But her maiden name was Kowalski. Something shifted in the older woman's expression. Rose Kowalski. From Chicago? Sarah nodded, surprised. Did you know her? Not personally, but... Dr. Vasquez paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. There are collectors in the art recovery community who become notorious, for lack of a better term. Your grandmother's name has come up in certain circles. The baby kicked hard against Sarah's ribs, as if responding to her sudden spike of anxiety. What kind of circles? The kind that track stolen art. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her voice dropping further. Ms. Chen, what you've shown me, these aren't just valuable pieces. 3 of these works appear on the Nazi art recovery database. They've been missing for nearly 80 years. Sarah's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as her hands began to shake. Are you certain? The Monet water lily study was taken from the Rosenberg family in Paris, 1943. The Van Gogh sketch disappeared from a private collection in Amsterdam the same year. And that small Picasso drawing? Dr. Vasquez's eyes were grave. It belonged to a family named Goldberg. They were deported to Auschwitz. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She thought of her unborn daughter, of the legacy she was supposed to be creating, not destroying. But how did my grandmother get them? That's the question, isn't it? Dr. Vasquez slid the phone back across the table. There are several possibilities, none of them pleasant. She could have been a dealer in stolen art, a collector who didn't ask the right questions, or what? She could have been working with the people who originally stole them. Sarah pressed her hands to her stomach, fighting a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. That's impossible. My grandmother she was difficult, cold maybe, but she wasn't a Nazi collaborator. I'm not suggesting she was. But the art market after the war was murky. Desperate people sold what they had. Stolen pieces were laundered through legitimate dealers, and sometimes good people made terrible choices to survive. Dr. Vasquez's voice softened slightly. What matters now is what you do next. What do you mean? These pieces belong to families who lost everything. Some may have surviving relatives still searching for them. You have a choice to make. Sarah stared at the phone, at the images that represented both a fortune and a catastrophe. If I report them, what happens? The FBI's art crime team would get involved. There would be investigations, publicity, legal proceedings. It could take years to sort out. And if I don't? Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. Then you're sitting on $200 million worth of stolen Nazi loot. That's not a secret that tends to stay buried forever. The coffee shop noise faded to a distant hum as Sarah absorbed the magnitude of her situation. Every option seemed to lead toward destruction, of her family's reputation, of her own future, of any chance at the quiet life she'd planned for her daughter. I need time to think, she said finally. Dr. Vasquez nodded, gathering her purse. Ms. Chen, whatever your grandmother's story was, it doesn't have to be yours. But as Sarah watched her leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that the choice had already been made for her the moment she opened that suitcase. The fluorescent lights in the university library's basement archives hummed with an electrical persistence that made Sarah's head throb. She'd been hunched over microfilm readers and dusty historical records for 3 hours, her lower back screaming in protest while her daughter performed what felt like gymnastic routines against her ribs. Professor Elena Vasquez emerged from between towering shelves of archival boxes, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she carried a manila folder thick with photocopied documents. Sarah had reached out to her former art history professor that morning, claiming to need research help for a freelance article about wartime art recovery. The lie had come easier than expected. You've picked quite the rabbit hole, Sarah, Elena said, settling into the chair across from her. The Nazi art theft program was far more extensive than most people realize. We're talking about systematic looting across occupied Europe. Hundreds of thousands of pieces, many still missing today. Sarah tried to appear casually interested rather than desperately invested. What happened to the art that was never recovered? That's where it gets complicated. Elena opened the folder, revealing photographs of paintings Sarah recognized with a jolt of recognition. Some pieces surface in legitimate auctions, purchased unknowingly by collectors decades later. Others remain hidden in private collections, their owners either unaware of the provenance or willfully ignoring it. And then there are the pieces that simply vanished, hidden by fleeing Nazi officials, buried in bombed buildings, scattered to the four winds. The baby kicked hard, and Sarah pressed her hand to her side. What about legal ownership? If someone inherited stolen art without knowing its history? Elena's expression grew serious, legally and morally complex. There are restitution laws now, and organizations like the World Jewish Restitution Organization actively hunt for stolen pieces. The rightful heirs, if they can be found, have legitimate claims regardless of current possession. Sarah's mouth went dry. What if the current owner refuses to give the art back? Legal battles can drag on for years, but there's also another element you should know about. Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping. There are people who've made careers out of recovering stolen Nazi art. Some work for legitimate organizations, but others, let's say they operate in grayer areas. The art world has its share of dangerous obsessions. The words sent ice through Sarah's veins. She thought of the black sedan, of Marcus Chen's warning about keeping quiet. What do you mean? I'm talking about private collectors willing to pay enormous sums for specific pieces, no questions asked. Art dealers who've built empires on looted works. There are documented cases of intimidation, theft, even violence when valuable pieces surface unexpectedly. Elena studied Sarah's face. Is everything all right? You look pale. Sarah forced a smile, but her hands were trembling as she gathered her notes. Just tired. Pregnancy, you know. Elena wasn't fooled. She pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a news article from 6 months earlier. This collector in Berlin was found dead in his apartment after announcing he planned to return a stolen Picasso to the family it was taken from. Police called it a burglary, but nothing was stolen except the painting. The room seemed to tilt around Sarah. She gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady herself as waves of nausea rolled through her stomach. This wasn't morning sickness, this was pure terror. Sarah, what's really going on? Elena's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades coaxing truth from reluctant students. Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. We know you've been asking questions. Stop looking into things that don't concern you. Her blood turned to ice water. Someone was watching her, had been watching her all day, probably since she'd left the apartment that morning. Sarah's eyes darted around the basement archives, suddenly seeing potential threats in every shadow between the stacks. I have to go, she whispered, shoving papers into her bag with shaking hands. Sarah, wait. But Elena was talking to empty air. Sarah hurried through the library's main floor, her heart hammering against her ribcage. Every person seemed suspicious. The student at the computer terminal who glanced up as she passed, the librarian who watched her exit, the maintenance worker mopping near the entrance. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright after hours in the basement. Sarah scanned the street for the black sedan but saw only typical campus traffic. That somehow made it worse, not knowing where the threat was coming from or how close it might be. Her phone rang, making her jump. David's name on the screen. Where are you? His voice was tight with worry. I came home early and you weren't here. After what happened yesterday, I'm at the university. I'm coming home now. Don't take the bus. Call a cab, stay in public places, and the line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone in horror as a terrible certainty settled over her. They had David too. The morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds as Sarah sat at her laptop, hands trembling slightly as she typed search terms into the browser. Marcus had left early for a conference call, kissing her forehead and promising they'd figure everything out together. But Sarah couldn't wait. The suitcase upstairs felt like a ticking bomb, and she needed answers. Nazi stolen art recovery yielded thousands of results. She scrolled through articles about the monuments men, restitution efforts, and families still searching for artwork looted decades ago. Each story made her stomach tighten. These weren't just paintings, they were pieces of people's lives, torn away during humanity's darkest chapter. She found a database maintained by the World Jewish Restitution Organization and began cross-referencing the paintings from Grandmother Rose's photographs. The first hit made her breath catch. The Degas ballerina, Rehearsal in Blue, was listed as stolen from the Rosenberg family in Paris, 1943. Sarah's hands moved to her belly as she read the details. Isaac and Miriam Rosenberg, their 3 children, deported to Auschwitz. Only their youngest daughter survived. She died in 2003, still searching for her family's stolen artwork. The next painting yielded similar results. Then the next. Each entry was a story of loss, of families destroyed, of cultural heritage ripped away. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We need to meet. I have information about your grandmother's collection. Café Luna, 2 p.m. Come alone. D. Weber." Sarah stared at the message, ice forming in her veins. No one should know about the paintings except Marcus, and he would never give out her number to a stranger. She checked the locks on all the doors, then returned to her laptop with shaking hands. She searched for D. Weber Nazi art and found several academic papers written by Dr. Daniel Weber, a professor of Holocaust studies at Georgetown University. His research focused on art recovery and restitution efforts. His photo showed a man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. But how did he know about Grandmother Rose's collection? Sarah's phone rang, making her jump. The caller ID showed her mother's number. "Hi, Mom." "Sarah, honey, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about your grandmother's things." Her mother's voice was strained. "Maybe I should come over and help you go through them." "It's okay, Mom. I've got it handled. There might be things you don't understand, things about your grandmother's past that I never told you." Sarah gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of things?" A long pause. "Her family didn't die in a car accident, Sarah. That was just easier to explain to a child. They died in the camps. Rose barely escaped Europe. She never talked about how she survived, how she made it to America. Some things are better left buried." The baby kicked hard against Sarah's ribs, as if responding to her racing heartbeat. "Mom, did she ever mention having valuable artwork?" "Artwork?" Her mother's voice sharpened. "Why would you ask that?" "I found some old photographs." "Don't." The word came out like a gunshot. "Don't go looking for answers to questions that will only bring pain. Your grandmother built a good life here. Let her rest in peace." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, her mother's words echoing in her mind. What wasn't she being told? She thought about the elegant handwriting in Rose's journal, the careful way she documented each piece. This wasn't the work of someone who'd stumbled upon stolen art. This was methodical, deliberate. She pulled up the photos again, studying them with new eyes. In one image, she could see the edge of what looked like a receipt or document. She zoomed in, trying to make out the text, but the resolution was too poor. The clock showed 1:30 p.m. The mysterious Dr. Weber would be waiting at Café Luna in 30 minutes. Sarah knew she should call Marcus, should wait for him to come home so they could handle this together. But her mother's reaction had changed something. The desperation in her voice, the way she'd hung up. There were secrets here that went deeper than a simple inheritance. She grabbed her purse and car keys, leaving a note for Marcus that she'd gone for a walk. The lie sat heavy in her stomach along with everything else. As she drove toward downtown, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a line she couldn't uncross. But the families in those database entries deserved justice. The Rosenberg daughter had died still searching for her family's stolen treasures. How many others were out there, still hoping? The baby shifted inside her, and Sarah placed a protective hand over her belly. Whatever secrets her family had been hiding, whatever dangerous path she was about to walk down, she needed to know the truth. Her child deserved to inherit something better than lies wrapped in beautiful paintings. The cafe appeared ahead, and Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Time to face whatever Dr. Weber knew about her grandmother's dark legacy. The rain hammered against the windows of the cramped motel room as Sarah stared at the laptop screen, her fingers trembling over the keyboard. 24 hours had passed since she'd fled her apartment, and the weight of her grandmother's secret pressed down on her like a physical force. The suitcase sat open beside her on the bed, its contents seeming to mock her with their terrible beauty. She'd spent the morning researching each piece, cross-referencing databases of stolen art from World War II. Every search result confirmed her worst fears. The Monet watercolor had been looted from the Rosenberg family in Paris, 1943. The small Picasso sketch had belonged to a Jewish art dealer named Hermann Goldman, who died in Buchenwald. Each piece carried the weight of lives destroyed, families torn apart. Her phone buzzed with another text from David. "Please call me. I'm worried sick." She'd turned off the location services and paid for the motel in cash, but she knew she couldn't hide forever. Her obstetrician appointment was tomorrow, and missing it wasn't an option, not when the baby had been showing signs of distress at her last visit. A knock at the door made her freeze. 3 soft raps, then silence. Sarah closed the laptop and moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. A woman in her 60s stood outside, silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, wearing a charcoal wool coat that looked expensive even in the rain. "Miss Chen," the woman's voice carried a slight accent, German, perhaps Austrian. "My name is Dr. Eva Brennan. I believe we need to talk." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly as the baby kicked, as if sensing her spike of fear. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm a researcher with the Commission for Looted Art in Europe. I've been tracking those pieces for 15 years. A pause. "I knew your grandmother." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She leaned against the door, her mind racing. How had this woman found her? What did she know about Grandmother Rose? "Please," Dr. Brennan continued, "I understand you're frightened. I understand you're confused about what your grandmother may have done. But there are things you need to know about the real story behind those paintings." Against every instinct screaming at her to stay hidden, Sarah found herself turning the deadbolt. Dr. Brennan stepped inside, shaking rainwater from her coat. Up close, she had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, but there was something else there, a deep sadness that seemed etched into her features. "How did you find me?" Sarah asked, closing the door but keeping her distance. "Your grandmother left very specific instructions. She knew this day would come." Dr. Brennan's gaze moved to the open suitcase. "May I?" Sarah nodded reluctantly, watching as the older woman approached the paintings with the reverence of someone who understood their true significance. She stopped in front of the Monet, her breath catching. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Marie Rosenberg was 19 when the Nazis took this from her family's apartment. She survived the war, immigrated to Canada, spent 60 years searching for it before she died. "So, my grandmother was a thief." The words tasted bitter in Sarah's mouth. "Was she?" Dr. Brennan turned, studying Sarah's face. "Tell me what you know about Rose's war years." "Nothing. She never talked about it. She came to America in 1947, married my grandfather, started fresh." Sarah sank into the room's single chair, exhaustion overwhelming her. "I thought I knew her." Dr. Brennan pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a black-and-white photograph. A young woman, barely recognizable as Rose, stood among a group of people in front of a train. They looked haggard, hollow-eyed. "Displaced persons camp, Austria 1946. Your grandmother spent 3 years in Nazi camps before liberation. She wasn't a thief, Sarah. She was a survivor. And more than that, she was part of a network that rescued art from bombed museums and private collections. They saved thousands of pieces from destruction." Sarah stared at the photo, trying to reconcile this image with the grandmother who had taught her to bake apple strudel and told her bedtime stories about brave princesses. But if she was saving them, Why didn't she return them after the war? That's the complicated part. Dr. Brennan sat on the edge of the bed. The network operated in shadows. Many of the original owners were dead. Some pieces were claimed by multiple families or by governments. Others became leverage. Leverage for what? For keeping certain secrets buried. For protecting people who had helped during the war but might face retaliation. Your grandmother wasn't just guarding art, Sarah. She was guarding lives. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Sarah winced. Dr. Brennan noticed immediately. When are you due? 4 weeks. Maybe less. Sarah rubbed her belly, feeling trapped between past and future. I just want my child to be safe. Then we need to finish what your grandmother started. The phone rang at 3 in the morning, jarring Sarah from a restless sleep. She'd been dreaming of her grandmother again, but this time, Ruth had been warning her about something, her voice urgent and frightened. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the receiver, her swollen belly making it difficult to turn in bed. Hello? Silence stretched across the line, punctuated only by faint breathing. Who is this? Sarah demanded, fully awake now. The line went dead. Mark stirred beside her, his hand finding her shoulder in the darkness. Wrong number? Sarah didn't answer. She knew it wasn't. The breathing had been deliberate, listening, waiting. She pressed her palm against her belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly as if sensing her fear. The next morning brought no relief. As Sarah walked to her car after a doctor's appointment, she noticed the same black sedan that had been parked across from their apartment building. When she drove to the grocery store, it followed at a careful distance. When she stopped for gas, it waited in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant across the street. Her hands shook as she called Detective Morrison from the gas station. I'm being followed, she said without preamble when he answered. Are you sure? Pregnant women sometimes. I'm not being paranoid, Sarah snapped. Black sedan, license plate starts with KTN. It's been tailing me all morning. Morrison's tone shifted immediately. Where are you now? Fletcher Avenue gas station. Stay there. I'm 10 minutes out. Sarah remained in her car, doors locked, watching the sedan in her rearview mirror. The windows were tinted too dark to make out the driver, but she could feel eyes on her like a physical weight. When Morrison's unmarked police car pulled into the station, the sedan smoothly merged into traffic and disappeared. They're gone, Sarah said, as Morrison approached her window. He scanned the street, his expression grim. This changes things. The word is out about what you found, and it's attracting the wrong kind of attention. What kind of attention? Morrison leaned closer to her window, the kind that doesn't care about pregnant women or due process. There are people who've been looking for collections like your grandmother's for decades. Some of them are legitimate, museums, rightful heirs, government agencies. Others, he shook his head, others operate by different rules. Sarah's blood ran cold. What are you saying? I'm saying you need protection, real protection, and you need to make a decision about those paintings soon, before someone else makes it for you. That evening, Sarah sat across from Mark at their kitchen table, the weight of Morrison's words heavy between them. She'd told him everything, the phone call, the surveillance, Morrison's warning. Mark's face had grown paler with each detail. We have to give them back, Mark said finally. All of them. Tonight. It's not that simple. Sarah pushed her untouched dinner around her plate. Morrison said the authentication process could take months. And there are procedures, protocols. We can't just dump them on someone's doorstep. Then we get out of town, go to my parents' place in Oregon until this blows over. Running won't solve anything. These people, whoever they are, they know where we live. They know our names. You think they can't track us to Oregon? Mark stood abruptly, pacing to the window. He peered through the blinds before turning back to her. So what do you suggest? We sit here and wait for them to break down our door? Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly. The baby had been kicking more frequently today, as if responding to her elevated stress levels. I suggest we think this through. Morrison mentioned legitimate parties looking for this collection. Maybe we can reach out directly, bypass the official channels. And how exactly do we do that without painting an even bigger target on our backs? Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her heart hammered as she read the message aloud. "The paintings don't belong to you. Return them, and no one gets hurt. Keep them, and you'll lose more than money." Mark was beside her in an instant, reading over her shoulder. "That's it. We're calling Morrison right now." But as Sarah reached for the phone, it buzzed again. This time the message contained a photo that made her blood freeze. It was her walking out of the doctor's office that morning, her hand on her rounded belly, completely unaware she was being photographed. The message below the photo was simple: "We're watching." Sarah's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. These people weren't just following her. They were documenting her movements, her routines, her vulnerabilities. They knew exactly how to hurt her most. Mark was already dialing 911 when the lights went out, plunging their apartment into complete darkness. In the silence that followed, Sarah heard something that made her blood turn to ice, the soft click of their front door lock being manipulated. Someone was coming inside. The Kunstmuseum Basel stood like a fortress against the grey Swiss sky, its modernist facade reflecting Sarah's own internal turmoil. She clutched David's arm as they approached the entrance, the weight of the photographs in her purse feeling heavier than her swollen belly. Each step brought a fresh wave of nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. "We can still turn around," David whispered, his breath visible in the crisp October air. Sarah shook her head. "Dr. Hoffman is expecting us. If anyone can authenticate these pieces without raising red flags, it's him." The museum's interior buzzed with quiet reverence, visitors moving between exhibits in hushed appreciation. Sarah had contacted Klaus Hoffman 3 days ago, claiming to be a graduate student researching wartime art displacement. The elderly curator had been intrigued enough by her carefully worded inquiry to agree to a private consultation. They found him in a small office behind the medieval collection, a man whose wire-rimmed glasses and shock of white hair made him look like every stereotypical art professor Sarah had ever imagined. But his eyes were sharp, calculating, as they settled on her obvious pregnancy. "Mrs. Chen," he said in accented English, rising from behind a desk cluttered with art books and magnifying glasses. "Please, sit. You mentioned photographs of potentially significant pieces?" Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she withdrew the envelope. She'd selected 5 images: the Degas ballerina, a small Picasso sketch, the ornate gold menorah, and 2 paintings she hadn't been able to identify. Nothing too explosive, nothing that would immediately scream stolen Nazi loot. Dr. Hoffman's expression shifted the moment he saw the first photograph. The professional courtesy drained from his features, replaced by something Sarah couldn't quite read: recognition, perhaps, or concern. "Where did you say you obtained these images?" His voice had grown cautious. "Family collection," Sarah replied, sticking to the story they'd rehearsed. "My grandmother recently passed, and we're trying to understand what she left behind." The curator studied the Degas photograph for a long moment, then reached for a thick reference book. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency through the pages until he found what he was looking for. Sarah's heart sank as she saw the page, a catalogue of missing artworks with the unmistakable header "Looted Art Database." This particular Degas, Dr. Hoffman said carefully, was reported stolen from a private collection in Paris in 1943. The original owners were the Rothschild family. He looked up at Sarah, his gaze penetrating. "Are you familiar with the Washington Principles on Nazi-confiscated art?" David shifted beside her. "We're just trying to understand." "I think you understand more than you're admitting," the curator interrupted. He moved to the Picasso photograph. This sketch was part of the Rosenberg collection, seized from their apartment on Rue de la Boétie. The family perished at Auschwitz. The room seemed to tilt around Sarah. She gripped the arms of her chair, feeling the baby kick restlessly against her ribs, as if sensing her distress. Dr. Hoffman's voice softened slightly. "Mrs. Chen, I've spent 40 years helping families recover stolen artwork. I've seen the pain on both sides, those who unknowingly inherited looted pieces and the descendants of victims still searching for their family's treasures. If you truly have these works, hypothetically, Sarah managed. Hypothetically, he agreed, you would be in possession of items that belong to families who lost everything, but you would also be in considerable danger. Danger? David leaned forward. The curator removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. There are still those who profit from the black market in stolen art. Collectors who don't ask questions. Dealers who facilitate private sales. When pieces of this caliber surface, word spreads quickly through certain circles. He replaced his glasses. People have died for less valuable works. Sarah felt ice spreading through her veins. What would you recommend? Hypothetically? Official channels exist. The FBI has an art crime team. There are restitution lawyers who specialize in these cases, but, he hesitated, the process can take years, and it's not always private. Meaning your names would become public record. Your story would likely attract media attention. And those dangerous collectors I mentioned. They read newspapers too. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Sarah pressed her hand to her stomach. 8 months pregnant, and she was sitting in a Swiss museum discussing Nazi loot and death threats. The absurdity of it might have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. There is another option, Dr. Hoffman said quietly. Certain organizations facilitate anonymous returns. No questions asked, no publicity. The families get their heritage back, and you disappear from the story entirely. Sarah and David exchanged glances. It sounded too good to be true. What's the catch? David asked. Dr. Hoffman smiled grimly. The catch, my young friends, is that once you contact these organizations, there's no going back. You become part of a very serious, very permanent process. And some secrets, once shared, can never be taken back. The emergency room's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Sarah gripped the metal rails of her hospital bed. The cramped examination room smelled of disinfectant and fear sweat, making her already queasy stomach churn. Dr. Martinez finished reviewing her chart, his expression carefully neutral as he approached. The baby's heartbeat is strong, he said, offering a reassuring smile. But your blood pressure is elevated, and you're showing early signs of preeclampsia. Given what you've told me about the stress you've been under, I want to keep you for observation overnight. David squeezed her hand from the plastic chair beside her bed. Whatever you need, doctor. Sarah wanted to protest. The hospital felt too exposed, too vulnerable, but the thought of losing the baby silenced her objections. She nodded weakly as Dr. Martinez made notes and promised to check on her in a few hours. Once they were alone, David leaned closer. You have to tell me what's really going on, Sarah. This isn't just about stress from work anymore, is it? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hospital visits can be so unpredictable. Room 314 seems quiet tonight. Sarah's blood ran cold. She was in room 314. We need to leave, she whispered, struggling to sit up. Right now. David's eyes widened as he read the message over her shoulder. Without hesitation, he helped her swing her legs over the side of the bed. Her hospital gown caught on the 4-line, and she winced as the needle pulled. The back stairs, Sarah said, remembering the building's layout from her volunteer work years ago. There's an exit that leads to the parking structure. They moved as quickly as Sarah's condition allowed, David's arm supporting her weight. The hallway stretched endlessly before them, each shadow potentially hiding a threat. A nurse looked up from her station as they passed, but David smiled and waved casually, as if they were just taking a walk. The stairwell door closed behind them with a soft click. Sarah gripped the railing, her heart hammering as they descended step by careful step. The baby pressed against her ribs, making breathing difficult. Tell me about the suitcase, David said quietly as they reached the 3rd-floor landing. All of it. Between labored breaths, Sarah finally told him everything. The Nazi looted art, Wilhelm Brenner's demands, the impossible choice between her grandmother's freedom and their safety. David listened without interruption, his face growing paler with each revelation. They reached the parking level just as Sarah heard the stairwell door open several flights above them. Heavy footsteps echoed in the concrete space, moving fast. David's car was parked in the far corner, and they moved toward it with desperate urgency. Sarah's legs felt like lead weights, her vision blurring at the edges. The stress was taking its toll, and she knew they didn't have much time before her body gave out completely. As David fumbled with his keys, a black sedan pulled into the garage, its headlights cutting through the dim space. Sarah recognized the man behind the wheel, Brenner's associate from the coffee shop, the one who'd been watching her for weeks. "Drive," she gasped as they tumbled into David's car. "Just drive." David reversed out of the parking space as the sedan's doors opened. In the rear-view mirror, Sarah caught a glimpse of two men in dark suits moving toward them with purposeful strides. One spoke rapidly into a phone while the other reached inside his jacket. They spiraled up the parking garage's ramps, tires squealing against the concrete. David's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he navigated the tight turns. Behind them, the sedan gave chase, its engine roaring in the confined space. "Where are we going?" David asked as they burst out of the garage into the night air. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling another contraction grip her abdomen. This wasn't labor, not yet, but it was a warning. Her body was shutting down under the pressure, and the baby was paying the price. "The storage unit," she said finally. "We need to get the paintings. Sarah, you need medical attention. If we don't end this tonight, there won't be a safe hospital in the city." She looked at him through tears of exhaustion and determination. "Brenner wants his art back? Fine. But we're doing this on our terms." David took a sharp right turn, tires screaming against the asphalt. The sedan followed, closing the distance between them. Sarah's phone rang, another unknown number. "Don't answer it," David said, but Sarah was already swiping to accept the call. Mrs. Chen Brenner's voice was silk over steel. "You're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. Return to the hospital, retrieve our property, and this unpleasantness ends." "Go to hell," Sarah whispered, and hung up. But even as defiance flowed through her, she felt the baby shift restlessly, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them both. The warehouse stood like a tomb against the storm-darkened sky, its broken windows gaping like dead eyes. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, watching raindrops streak down the windshield in jagged patterns that reminded her of tears. The suitcase sat in her passenger seat, its weight seeming to grow heavier with each passing moment. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her anxiety. "I know, sweetheart," she whispered, rubbing her belly. "Mama's scared too." Her phone buzzed. Marcus again. She'd been ignoring his calls for hours, knowing that hearing his voice would weaken her resolve. But this time, something made her answer. "Sarah, thank God. Where are you? It doesn't matter. I'm ending this. You can't just—" "I can, and I will. The art goes back where it belongs, and we disappear. New identities, new life. It's the only way to keep our baby safe." Static crackled through the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was strained. "Sarah, you need to listen to me. I found something about your grandmother, about why she really had those paintings." Her blood chilled. "What are you talking about?" "I've been digging into her past, cross-referencing names from the war records. Eleanor Hoffman wasn't just some random recipient of stolen art. Her father, your great-grandfather, he was working with the resistance. They weren't stealing from victims, Sarah. They were stealing from the Nazis." The words hit her like a physical blow. "That's impossible." The paintings were part of a network, Jewish families and resistance fighters working together to hide art from Nazi collectors before it could be shipped to Germany. Your great-grandfather was Jewish, Sarah. He was protecting his own people's heritage. Rain hammered against the car roof as Sarah struggled to process this revelation. Everything she thought she knew about her family's shame was crumbling, But the provenance papers, forged, but not by criminals, by heroes. They had to make it look like the art belonged to Nazi collectors to keep the resistance network from being exposed. If the real owners had been discovered, entire families would have been murdered. Sarah's mind raced. If this was true, then the paintings weren't stolen treasures. They were rescued ones. Cultural artifacts saved from destruction, hidden away until they could be safely returned. But returned to whom? Many of the original owners were likely dead, their families scattered to the winds. How do you know all this? Because I'm not just a journalist, Sarah. I'm working with a task force that tracks down looted art. We've been following leads on this particular collection for years. The betrayal hit her like ice water. You've been lying to me this entire time. I was assigned to investigate the story, yes, but everything between us, that's real. The moment I met you, this stopped being just another case. Through the rain-blurred windshield, Sarah spotted movement near the warehouse entrance. A black sedan, its headlights cutting through the gloom like predators' eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Marcus, I think they found me. Who? Where are you? The industrial district on 5th Street. There's a car. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone in horror before realizing the battery had died. She was alone, 8 months pregnant, with $200 million in stolen or rescued art, and someone was hunting her. The sedan's doors opened. 2 figures emerged, moving with military precision toward her car. Sarah fumbled for the keys, her pregnant belly making it difficult to maneuver behind the steering wheel. The engine coughed twice before turning over. As she threw the car into reverse, headlights flooded her rearview mirror. Another vehicle had appeared behind her, boxing her in. Panic clawed at her throat as she realized the truth. This wasn't random. They'd been tracking her, waiting for her to lead them to the art. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Sarah felt a sharp pain shoot through her abdomen. Not now, she thought desperately. Not here. Men in dark coats approached from both sides, their faces hidden in shadow. One of them spoke into a radio, his voice carrying through the rain. "We have her cornered. The package is secure." Sarah closed her eyes and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of surrendering, she gripped the suitcase handle and whispered a prayer her grandmother might have recognized. Then she pressed the accelerator to the floor and aimed straight for the warehouse wall. The last thing she heard before impact was the sound of her own scream mixing with the storm. Detective Morrison paced by the window, periodically lifting the corner of a yellowed curtain to scan the empty street. Agent Chen hunched over a laptop at the small dining table, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she coordinated with teams across 3 continents. "The Swiss authorities have agreed to temporarily freeze Hoffman's accounts," Chen announced without looking up. "But his lawyer is already filing injunctions. We have maybe 48 hours before the money starts moving again." Sarah felt her baby kick hard against her ribs, as if protesting the tension in the room. She winced and shifted position, trying to find comfort in the uncomfortable silence that followed Chen's statement. "There's something else," Morrison said quietly, still watching the street. "The art recovery team found something interesting when they examined the paintings more closely." He turned from the window, his expression grim. Hidden beneath the frame of the Degas, there was a letter, written by your great-grandmother, dated just days before she died. Sarah's heart stuttered. "A letter?" Chen reached into a briefcase and withdrew a plastic evidence sleeve containing a yellowed piece of paper covered in spidery handwriting. "We had it translated from German." Sarah, she knew exactly what those paintings were and where they came from. The room seemed to tilt around Sarah as Chen handed her the sleeve. The words, translated into English, were typed on a separate sheet clipped to the original. "My dearest family, if you are reading this, then the burden I have carried for 60 years has passed to you. I pray you will be stronger than I was, braver than I was. The paintings hidden in this case are not treasures. They are testimonies to lives stolen, dreams destroyed. Each one was torn from the walls of homes where laughter once echoed, where families gathered, where love lived. I have told myself for decades that I saved them, that taking them from Klaus was preservation rather than theft. But I know the truth. I know that somewhere survivors wait for these pieces of their heritage to come home. I was too frightened, too ashamed to make it right. Perhaps you will find the courage I never possessed. The names are written on the back of each frame, the families from whom they were stolen. Find them. Return what was never ours to keep. With love and regret, Elena Richter. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the letter twice, then a third time. Her great-grandmother's face in that old photograph suddenly looked different, not serene but haunted, not peaceful but burdened. She knew, Sarah whispered. All this time she knew and she couldn't. She was probably terrified, Morrison said gently. A young woman, alone in a foreign country, carrying stolen goods. The war was barely over. Trust was a luxury no one could afford. Another contraction gripped Sarah, stronger this time. She breathed through it, focusing on Morrison's words rather than the pain. When it passed, she looked up to find both agents watching her with concern. "How much time do I have?" she asked. "The contractions are still irregular," Chen observed. "Could be hours, could be days." "I meant with Hoffman." Morrison and Chen exchanged a look. "He's gone quiet," Morrison admitted. "His known associates have disappeared. Either he's planning something or he's cutting his losses and running." "He's not running," Sarah said with certainty. "He's waited too long for this. Lost too much." She struggled to her feet, one hand pressed against her lower back. "He'll make one last play." As if summoned by her words, Chen's laptop chimed with an incoming message. The agent's face paled as she read the screen. "Sarah, you need to see this." The email was brief, sent from an untraceable account. "Ms. Mitchell, you have something that belongs to me. I have something that belongs to you. Your cousin David is enjoying my hospitality, though he won't for much longer." Midnight. The Warehouse District, Pier 47. "Come alone, bring the paintings and no one gets hurt. Involve the police and David dies. Simple mathematics. K. Hoffman." Attached was a photograph. David, bound to a chair in what looked like a shipping container, his face bruised but his eyes defiant. Sarah's knees buckled. Morrison caught her arm, supporting her weight as another contraction seized her body. This one was different, sharper, more insistent. Her water broke with a warm rush that soaked through her jeans. "Oh!" she gasped, looking down at the puddle forming at her feet. "Oh no, not now." Chen was already on her phone, calling for an ambulance. Morrison guided Sarah back to the couch, his training taking over. "It's going to be okay," he said, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "We'll figure this out." But even as he spoke the reassuring words, they all knew the truth. Hoffman had just made the game infinitely more complicated, and time had officially run out. She checked her phone again. 11:47 p.m. Marcus was 13 minutes late. A door slammed somewhere in the darkness, followed by the echo of footsteps. Sarah's breath caught as a figure emerged from the shadows, but it wasn't Marcus. The man was tall, angular, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the dim light. Behind him walked two others, their faces obscured, but their movements predatory. "Miss Chen," the pale man said, his accent unmistakably German. "You've led us quite a chase." Sarah's throat constricted. "Who are you?" "My name is Klaus Brenner. My grandfather was an SS Oberfuhrer who worked very closely with your grandmother's employers." He stepped closer, and Sarah could see the cold calculation in his ice-blue eyes. "The art you discovered belongs to my family. That's not, you can't just," Sarah stammered, instinctively placing a protective hand over her belly. Klaus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Legal ownership is such a fluid concept, don't you think? Especially when it concerns items that were never meant to surface." He nodded to one of his companions, who immediately began circling Sarah like a shark. "The paintings were stolen from Jewish families," Sarah said, finding her voice. "They belong in museums or returned to the survivors." "Idealistic nonsense," Klaus spat. "Those families are long dead. The art has been ours for 70 years. We simply allowed your grandmother to." safeguard it. Sarah's mind raced. Where was Marcus? Had something happened to him, or had he set her up? She thought about the burner phone in her pocket, the one Detective Rodriguez had given her, but she couldn't reach for it without drawing attention. "I don't have the paintings," she lied. Klaus studied her face for a long moment. "No, but you have the documentation, the provenance records. Without those, the art is worthless on any legitimate market." He extended his hand. "Give me the envelope and we'll allow you to walk away." Sarah hugged the documents tighter to her chest. "And if I refuse? Then you'll discover that pregnancy offers no protection from certain unpleasant realities." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt the baby kick again, as if responding to her spike of adrenaline. She thought about her grandmother's letter, about the weight of secrets and the price of silence. Then she thought about her unborn daughter, about the life growing inside her that deserved a chance to exist without looking over its shoulder. "My grandmother never told you where the paintings were, did she?" Sarah said suddenly. "That's why you need me. That's why you've been watching, waiting, hoping I'd lead you to them." Klaus's expression darkened. "Your grandmother was more stubborn than wise. She died protecting thieves and murderers. She died protecting victims," Sarah shot back. "And so will I." Before Klaus could respond, the warehouse door burst open. Marcus rushed in, but he wasn't alone. Detective Rodriguez and 3 other officers followed close behind, weapons drawn. "LAPD, nobody move." Chaos erupted. Klaus shouted something in German and dove behind a stack of shipping crates. His companions scattered in opposite directions, one of them grabbing Sarah's arm and yanking her deeper into the shadows. She screamed as pain shot through her side, the manila envelope falling from her grasp and spilling authentication papers across the dirty floor. Gunshots echoed through the warehouse. Sarah found herself pressed against a wall, the man's forearm across her throat, while he used her as a human shield. She could smell his sour breath, feel the tremor in his hands that suggested he was more frightened than she was. "Let her go!" Rodriguez's voice boomed from somewhere in the darkness. "The woman comes with us," Klaus called back. "Lower your weapons or she dies." Sarah felt something wet trickling down her leg and realized with horror that she was bleeding. The stress, the violence, the sheer terror. Her body was responding in the worst possible way. She thought about Dr. Patel's warnings about premature labor, about the delicate balance required to keep her baby safe. "I'm bleeding," she whispered to the man holding her. "The baby—" He cursed under his breath, his grip loosening slightly. It was enough. Sarah drove her elbow back into his ribs and broke free just as Marcus appeared around a corner, tackling the man to the ground. As she stumbled toward the scattered documents, Sarah caught a glimpse of Klaus disappearing through a side exit. The authentication papers lay torn and dirty at her feet, 70 years of hidden truth finally exposed to the harsh, fluorescent beam of Rodriguez's flashlight. The warehouse district stretched before them like a graveyard of rust and broken dreams. Sarah pressed her hand against her belly as Marcus guided their rental car through the maze of abandoned buildings, each shadow potentially hiding their enemies. The afternoon sun cast long fingers of light between the structures, creating a checkerboard of visibility and concealment that made her skin crawl. There, Marcus pointed to a squat brick building with boarded windows. "That's the address Hoffman gave us." Sarah studied the structure, noting the fresh tire tracks in the dirt and the suspiciously new padlock on what appeared to be a decrepit door. "This feels wrong. Everything about this feels wrong." "You don't have a choice." Marcus parked behind a rusted shipping container. "The FBI traced the first buyer to this location. If the Monet is here, we can authenticate it and prove your grandmother was trying to return the art, not profit from it." Sarah wanted to believe him, but the knot in her stomach had nothing to do with her pregnancy. Through the passenger window, she watched a black sedan creep past the warehouse entrance for the second time in 5 minutes. "Marcus, we're being watched." He followed her gaze, and his jaw tightened. Katarina's people? Or the buyers? Or someone else entirely? She fumbled for her phone. "We should call Detective Reynolds." "And tell him what?" that we're investigating stolen Nazi art in an abandoned warehouse based on a tip from a man who may or may not be a war criminal? Marcus shook his head. We need proof first, real evidence. The baby kicked hard against Sarah's ribs, as if sensing her fear. She breathed slowly, trying to calm herself for the child's sake. 5 minutes. We go in, document what we find, and get out. They approached the warehouse through a gap in the chain-link fence, Marcus carrying a small crowbar and flashlight, while Sarah clutched her phone, ready to call for help. The padlock yielded surprisingly easily, confirming her suspicion that someone wanted them inside. The warehouse interior was a cathedral of shadows and dust motes dancing in shafts of sunlight that pierced the boarded windows. But it wasn't empty. Wooden crates lined the walls, each marked with shipping labels from various European cities. In the center of the space, an easel held a painting covered by a white cloth. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, playing his flashlight beam across the crates. "There must be 50 pieces here." Sarah approached the easel with trembling hands. The cloth came away to reveal a water lily scene that made her breath catch, Monet's unmistakable brushstrokes capturing light on water with heartbreaking beauty. A small placard at the base listed the painting's provenance, including the damning words, "Acquired from Jewish collection, Berlin, 1943. "It's real," she said, photographing everything with her phone. "And it's definitely stolen." Marcus was prying open one of the crates, revealing a sculpture that gleamed gold even in the dim light. "Sarah, this isn't just stolen art. This is a storage facility. Someone's been collecting this stuff for decades." The sound of footsteps on gravel outside froze them both. Sarah's heart hammered as voices approached, at least 3 people speaking in hushed tones. Marcus grabbed her hand and pulled her behind a stack of crates, just as the warehouse door opened. The package arrived this morning, a woman's voice echoed through the space. Sarah recognized the slight accent, Katerina. "Good. The buyers are eager to complete the transaction." This voice was unfamiliar, older, with a German inflection that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "What about the girl? She's becoming a problem. The girl has served her purpose. Once we have the remaining pieces from her grandmother's collection, she becomes expendable." Sarah bit her lip to keep from gasping. Marcus's hand tightened on hers as footsteps approached their hiding spot. "The Rothenberg collection will finally be complete," the German voice continued. 70 years we've waited. Your grandmother was foolish to think she could expose us, just as you are foolish to think you can stop us." The footsteps stopped just feet from their hiding place. Sarah held her breath, pressing herself against the rough wood of the crate. The baby chose that moment to shift, causing her to grunt softly. The sound seemed to echo through the warehouse like a gunshot. What was that? Flashlight beams swept the space around them. Sarah closed her eyes and prayed, feeling Marcus tense beside her, ready to fight if necessary. But she couldn't run, couldn't fight, not with the baby so close to term. The beams moved past their hiding spot. Probably rats. "This place is infested. Let's finish the inventory and go. The authorities are getting too close to our operations." Sarah waited until their footsteps retreated before releasing the breath she'd been holding. They had stumbled into something much larger than her grandmother's suitcase, a network that had been operating for decades, stealing and selling art looted by the Nazis. And now they knew she was here. The warehouse district stretched before them like a concrete graveyard, shadows pooling between abandoned buildings under the sickly orange glow of sodium lights. Sarah pressed her hand against her swollen belly, feeling the baby's restless movements as David guided their car through the maze of empty streets. "This feels wrong," she whispered, scanning the desolate landscape. "Too isolated." David's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. "Muller chose this place for a reason. No witnesses, multiple escape routes." He glanced at her. "You don't have to do this, Sarah. We can still turn around." But they both knew it was too late for that. The consortium had made their position clear through increasingly violent demonstrations over the past week. Yesterday's incident at her doctor's office, windows shattered, nurses terrorized, had crossed every line she thought existed. Her unborn daughter deserved better than a life spent looking over her shoulder. The GPS announced their arrival at the designated coordinates, and David pulled into the shadow of a massive warehouse. Sarah could see Muller's black sedan already waiting, along with two other vehicles she didn't recognize, her stomach clenched with more than pregnancy discomfort. "Remember the plan," David said, checking his phone one final time. "Signal if anything goes sideways." Sarah nodded, though her mouth felt desert dry. The plan seemed laughably simple now that they were here. Transfer the art to Mueller, accept his protection, and hope the consortium would honor their retreat once their prize was beyond reach. But looking at the isolated warehouse, she wondered if they were walking into an elaborate trap. They approached the building together, Sarah's waddle pronounced now at 8.5 months. The side door opened before they could knock, revealing Muller's weathered face etched with tension. "You brought everything?" he asked without preamble. David hefted the reinforced case containing the 3 pieces they'd kept. The rest of the collection had already been transferred through intermediaries, but these final works, including the crown jewel Monet that had started everything, represented the real power in this negotiation. Inside the warehouse, harsh fluorescent lights illuminated a space that felt more like an operating theater than an art exchange. 3 men in expensive suits flanked a table where authentication equipment waited. Sarah recognized none of them, but their predatory stillness made her skin crawl. "The consortium's representatives," Muller explained quietly. "They insisted on being present for verification." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't the plan. Muller was supposed to handle the consortium separately, maintaining distance between Sarah and the people who'd threatened her family. Seeing them here, watching her with calculating eyes, felt like staring down wolves. The lead representative, a man with silver hair and dead eyes, stepped forward. "Mrs. Chen, you've led us quite a chase." "The chase ends here," Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "You get what you want, and my family gets peace." He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Peace. Such an interesting concept. Your grandmother certainly didn't find much of it, knowing what she'd stolen. The casual cruelty in his tone made Sarah's hands shake. David moved closer to her, a protective barrier she desperately needed. Muller began unpacking the case, each artwork carefully revealed under the harsh lights. The authentication team went to work with practiced efficiency, their equipment humming and clicking as they verified provenance and condition. The Monet emerged last, its serene water lilies a stark contrast to the violence that had followed it across decades. "Magnificent," the silver-haired man breathed. "Your grandmother had excellent taste in her thievery. She was protecting these pieces from destruction," Sarah said, unable to stay silent. "The Nazis would have—" "The Nazis were our employers then, Mrs. Chen, just as different parties employ us now." His smile turned predatory. "Moral flexibility is essential in our line of work." The authentication team finished their work, nodding to their superior. Everything was genuine, every piece accounted for. Sarah felt a mix of relief and horror as Muller completed the transfer paperwork. After months of living in fear, it was ending not with violence but with signatures on contracts. But as the consortium representatives began carefully packing the artwork, Sarah noticed David checking his phone with increasing frequency. Something in his expression made her stomach drop. "What is it?" she whispered. David's face had gone pale. "Rachel isn't answering her phone. Neither is Tom." The silver-haired man looked up from supervising the packing, that cold smile playing at his lips again. "Insurance, Mrs. Chen. We needed to ensure your cooperation during the transfer." Sarah's world tilted. "You said," Muller said. "I said the chase would end here," he corrected. "I never said it would end in your favor." The warehouse light seemed to flicker as Sarah realized they'd walked into something far worse than a simple exchange. The consortium hadn't come here to make a deal. They'd come to tie up loose ends. The warehouse smelled of rust and abandoned dreams. Sarah's footsteps echoed against concrete as she made her way through the maze of shipping containers, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other gripping the leather satchel containing 3 of the most valuable paintings in the world. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her terror. Marcus emerged from behind a stack of crates, his familiar smile now seeming predatory in the dim light filtering through grimy windows. "You came alone. Smart girl. Where's David?" Sarah's voice carried more strength than she felt. Her husband should have been here by now, but the warehouse stretched empty and silent around them. Safe, for now. Marcus gestured to a wooden chair positioned in the center of the open space. "Sit. You look tired." Sarah remained standing. "I brought what you asked for. The Monet, the Picasso, and the Degas. Now let him go. Show me first." With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the satchel. The paintings, carefully wrapped in acid-free tissue, seemed to glow even in the warehouse's harsh shadows. Marcus's eyes widened with genuine hunger as she revealed each piece. "Magnificent," he breathed, stepping closer. "Your grandmother had exquisite taste, even if she was a thief." "She wasn't a thief. She was trying to save them from being destroyed." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Is that the story she told herself? Rebecca knew exactly what she was doing when she walked out of that bombed museum in Berlin. These belong in their rightful home, with their rightful owners. The rightful owners are dead, murdered by the same regime that stole these in the first place. They're heirs, then. There are procedures, Sarah. Legal channels. Your grandmother chose to circumvent all of that. Sarah felt a sharp pain lance through her side. Not the baby, just her body's response to stress. You don't care about legal channels. You're working for someone who wants these for themselves. For a moment, Marcus's composed mask slipped. The Hoffman family has spent 70 years tracking down their stolen collection. They have every right to reclaim what was taken from them. By putting a gun to a pregnant woman's head. By doing what's necessary. The mask was back in place. You could have made this easy, Sarah. Could have turned them over to the proper authorities months ago. Instead, you chose to protect a dead woman's secrets. The baby kicked again, harder this time. Sarah winced and placed both hands on her belly. Where is David? Marcus checked his watch. He should be here soon, along with the rest of the collection. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? This is everything. These 3 paintings are all I brought. Don't insult my intelligence. I know there are at least 6 more pieces. The Van Gogh sketch, the Kandinsky, I destroyed them. The lie came easier than breathing. I burned them last night rather than let you have them. Marcus's face contorted with rage. In 2 quick strides, he was close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow that she'd never noticed during all those friendly coffee meetings. You're lying. Am I? Sarah met his gaze steadily. You think I'd risk my child's life for some old paintings? I kept these 3 because I knew you'd never believe I'd destroyed everything. But the rest? Gone. Ashes. For a terrible moment she thought he might strike her. Instead, Marcus pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Bring him in. The warehouse door screeched open. David stumbled through, his hands zip-tied behind his back, a strip of duct tape across his mouth. Behind him walked a woman Sarah had never seen before, tall, severe, with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She held a gun with the casual ease of someone comfortable with violence. Mrs. Chen, the woman said, her accent faintly European. I am Elena Hoffman. I believe you have something that belongs to my family. Sarah's legs suddenly felt weak. This was no simple recovery operation. This was personal, generational hatred made manifest. I gave Marcus what I had. 3 paintings. Elena's voice was silk over steel. My grandfather's collection contained over 40 pieces. We have documentation, provenance, photographs. I know what Rebecca stole, and it was far more than 3 paintings. David's eyes met Sarah's across the warehouse floor. Even with the tape over his mouth, she could read his expression. Run. Save yourself and the baby. But there was nowhere to run. Elena's associate had positioned herself by the only visible exit, and Sarah was 8 months pregnant, moving like a ship in heavy seas. Instead, she straightened her spine and faced the woman whose family's tragedy had somehow become her inheritance. "Then I guess you're going to be disappointed," Sarah said quietly. "Because 3 paintings are all you're getting." Elena smiled, and it was the coldest thing Sarah had ever seen. "We'll see about that." The rain drummed against the museum's glass ceiling as Sarah stood in the restoration wing, watching the final piece, a small Degas ballerina, being carefully positioned in its climate-controlled case. 3 months had passed since that terrible night in the warehouse, and baby Emma slept peacefully in her carrier, oblivious to the magnitude of what surrounded her. "The exhibition opens next week," Dr. Hoffman said, approaching with a satisfied smile. 23 pieces, all authenticated, all properly documented. The families you've reunited with their heritage. Sarah, you've done something extraordinary." Sarah nodded, but her attention was drawn to the entrance where a familiar figure appeared. Marcus Brennan, looking older and somehow smaller than she remembered, stood uncertainly at the threshold. His left arm was still in a sling from the warehouse confrontation. "You came," Sarah said simply. "You invited me." His voice was hoarse, though I wasn't sure you meant it. They walked slowly through the exhibition space, past paintings that had been hidden for decades, their colors now vibrant under proper lighting. Marcus stopped before a Picasso sketch, his expression unreadable. "She never told me about the families," he said finally. "Your grandmother. I knew about the art, obviously, but she never mentioned that she knew whose lives had been destroyed to acquire these pieces." Sarah adjusted Emma's blanket, buying herself time to choose her words carefully. Maybe she couldn't face it. Maybe that's why she held on to them for so long. Or maybe she was just selfish. Marcus's honesty surprised her. "I've had time to think, sitting in that hospital room, about her, about what I did to protect her memory, about what I nearly did to you." A security guard nodded respectfully as they passed. The museum had been extraordinarily cooperative once they understood the significance of the collection and Sarah's intentions. The story had made international headlines. "Pregnant woman returns Nazi stolen art worth $200 million. "The prosecutor wants to know if you'll testify," Sarah said. "About Kozlov's organization, about the network." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Will it help put them away?" "According to Agent Chen, yes. Your testimony could expose connections they've been trying to prove for years." They stopped in front of a small placard that read, "This exhibition is made possible through the courage of Sarah Weiss, who chose justice over personal gain." Below it, in smaller text, "Donated in memory of Rebecca Weiss, 1931 to 2023, and in honor of Emma Claire Weiss, born September 15, 2023. Marcus read it twice. "She would have been furious, you know. Rebecca, about the donation." "I know." Sarah smiled sadly. "But she would have understood eventually. She kept these pieces for 80 years, Marcus. That's not the action of someone who felt entitled to them." Emma stirred, making small sounds that meant feeding time was approaching. Sarah found a quiet bench in an alcove between 2 restored paintings, a landscape and a portrait of a young mother with her child. "I keep thinking about what you said," Marcus continued, sitting beside her as she prepared to nurse. "About family meaning more than blood. About choosing who we become. And I choose to testify. I choose to help you finish what she started, even if she never found the courage to do it herself." Agent Chen appeared as if summoned, though Sarah suspected she'd been waiting nearby. "Mr. Brennan, if you're ready, we have quite a few questions." As Marcus stood to leave with Chen, he turned back. "Sarah, your grandmother did love you. Whatever else was true, whatever mistakes she made, that was real." Sarah watched him go, then looked down at Emma, who was now feeding contentedly. Through the glass ceiling, the rain was stopping, and late afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, casting everything in golden light. Dr. Hoffman returned with a young woman in tow, Anna Kozlowski, granddaughter of the family who had lost the Picasso sketch during the war. She was crying as she stood before the piece, her great-grandfather's signature visible in the corner. "We never thought we'd see it again," Anna whispered. "My grandmother described it to me so many times, but to actually see it—" Sarah watched the reunion, Emma warm against her chest, and felt something settle in her heart. The money from selling the art could have secured Emma's entire future. The inheritance could have solved every financial worry Sarah ever had. As the sun set over the city, Sarah gathered Emma's things and prepared to leave. Tomorrow there would be more interviews, more legal proceedings, more questions about her choice to give up a fortune. Tonight, though, she was simply a mother walking home with her daughter, carrying no secrets, no stolen legacy, no burden heavier than a diaper bag. For the first time in months, Sarah felt truly free.